How many of you had the opportunity to read the sutta? Okay. It's a long sutta, so I'm only going to cover probably about half of it tonight, and then the other half on next Tuesday. And I'm going to read the introduction. The Ariyapariyesana Sutta is one of the most significant suttas in the Sutta Pitaka. Recounting Siddhartha Gotama's own experience during his search for understanding, the sutta provides continual guidance on establishing and maintaining an authentic, practical, and effective Dhamma practice. This sutta also clearly explains the underlying motivation for the development of the many confusing and contradictory dharmas. And in the next paragraph, I explain the use of the word dharma and dhamma. When I'm using the word dharma, I'm referring to things during the Buddha's time that he studied but realized weren't leading to the goal. And today referring to modern Buddhist dharmas that have adapted, accommodated, diminished, or embellished the Buddha's original teachings, as opposed to the Dhamma, which is what the Buddha taught as preserved in the Sutta Pitaka. And the Buddha's consistent teaching method of clearly describing the difference between his Dhamma and other common and popular dharmas of his time. In this remarkable sutta, the Buddha uses his own search for understanding as a profoundly wise and compassionate example for our search for understanding. In this sutta, the Buddha teaches that a noble search must have a focused direction that does not simply reinforce ignorance. The framework and guidance of the Eightfold Path support recognizing and abandoning the fabrications that have arisen from ignorance, as described in the Paticca Sutta, the primary sutta on dependent origination. And that sutta, the Buddha, it's what the Buddha awakened to, that it is ignorance, a very specific ignorance of Four Noble Truths that leads to a fabricated mind state that results in all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing suffering or disappointing human life experiences. And so, and I'll probably get to the section on this next week. But upon the Buddha's awakening, he sat off and on in meditation, considering if it was going to be even worthwhile, if it was going to be possible to actually teach his understanding, knowing what he knew about the nature of ignorance, which is a mind rooted in ignorance will create very powerful and subtle strategies to ignore its own ignorance. And most of the adaptations, even during the Buddha's time, were specifically for that reason, to give the impression that you're doing, engage in some type of spiritual practice, but actually what you're doing is you have developed or have attached to a common strategy to ignore ignorance. Again, as I get into the two significant teachers that the Buddha studied with, you'll see that in that. But you can say that a great portion of the Buddha's entire 45-year teaching career was teaching how to recognize and abandon ignorance and develop a Dhamma that is rooted in wisdom and is focused on developing understanding of Four Noble Truths. There are many important themes represented in the sutta. In fact, if you've read it, you'll see that there's, I think, 17 articles that I linked to that are represented in this sutta. Siddhartha describes his studying with two very popular and powerful teachers who hope to have him join their community. Siddhartha did not succumb to self-identifying with popular or commonly practiced dharmas. Despite the common attraction and distraction, he maintained his noble search for a singular noble eightfold path or noble path. Siddhartha was not seeking a Dhamma that his associates were enamored with or that he could have a significant position in. He avoided giving legitimacy to a Dharma simply due to a charismatic leader, general popularity, or a compulsive non-dual all religions are one view. He was not seeking a Dhamma that reaffirmed familiar, popular, but fabricated views. No understanding can develop from that which is inherently impermanent and is clearly prone to continuing confused and deluded thinking that supports the three defilements of craving, aversion, and continued delusion. He was engaged in a noble search that avoided further confusion, distraction, self-reference, and suffering. His noble search was for a noble path that culminates in peace and understanding, free of fabricated or wrong views, rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Significantly, he continued his search until he established seclusion and disentanglement from the influence of common dharmas. While engaging in a realistic meditation practice that avoided further distraction, he was able to recognize the fabricated views rooted in his own ignorance by directly developing concentration, by directly developing jhana. So that's one of the reasons why I'm teaching this now after this last series of talks. As described here in the sutta, he attained the unborn and the unexcelled release of the yoke from ignorant views which would provoke continually giving birth to the ongoing experience of suffering or dukkha rooted in views ignorant of Four Noble Truths. That's the reference to the unborn or the deathless state. It has really very little to do with, it has nothing to do with attaining immortality, as might be inferred by attaining the deathless state, which is something that's taught. And it has nothing to do with, has very little to do with a future birth. What it has everything to do with is ending ignorance so that there's nothing left to provoke giving birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. And that's clear, I think, to everyone, isn't it? That's really the meaning behind the title of my book and the whole substance of the Buddhist teaching of becoming awakening. Means we go through a process of recognizing and abandoning anything, any view that is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, abandoning those views so that we can become awakened. Holding on to any view rooted in ignorance will block that awakening. As the Buddha describes in the Nagara Sutta, he was finally able to recognize the feedback loop of self-referential views bound by thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. He became rightly self-awakened, that's how he referred to himself and other people that awakened, and freed himself from all wrong views that would provoke the birth of another moment rooted in self-referenced ignorance. Siddhartha Gotama, now Buddha, begins his teaching career by instructing the group of 5 friends he previously wandered around northern India with, all seeking understanding. He explains to them his disappointing and unproductive experience from his studying with these teachers, who taught self-establishment in imaginary non-physical planes. He explains to them that searching for understanding where only craving, clinging, confusion, distraction, and ongoing disappointment can be found is an ignoble search, leading to the many confusing, contradictory, and ignoble paths. Essentially, the Buddha teaches that to engage in a search that is itself directed by ignorance will only ignore ignorance and continually obscure wisdom. It really, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, when you look at it that way? Whatever you're doing, if it's rooted in ignorance and motivated by ignorance, can only reinforce ignorance. A life spent in ignorance of Four Noble Truths is a life spent in an ignoble search for peace, satisfaction, and understanding, where peace, satisfaction, and understanding cannot be found. As recounted here and taught in the Ariyapariyesana Sutta, Siddhartha Gotama eventually became rightly awakened, by first realizing that understanding cannot be found in searching in dharmas rooted in ignorance and inherently prone to confusion, delusion, and ongoing disappointment, or by using rituals and practices that are themselves rooted in craving, aversion, and delusion, and that are inherently impermanent and ever-changing, that reinforce self-identification and are shrouded behind the veil of ongoing ignorance. Becoming stuck in the feedback loop of self-referential views, reverberating off of ongoing thinking, ignorant of Four Noble Truths, as described in the Nagara Sutta, is the initial condition that supports the fabricated wrong views that give rise to the compulsion to adapt, accommodate, and embellish a rightly self-awakened human being's Dhamma. Siddhartha eventually developed profound understanding and awakened right view from recognizing and abandoning spiritual or religious practices that constitute an ignoble search. By recognizing and abandoning beliefs and practices rooted in ignorance, Siddhartha discovered the simple and direct Eightfold path that provides focused guidance for noble search. In this way, it becomes obvious that the recognition and development of the practice and development of Shamatha-Vipassana meditation is singularly paramount to integrating the entire Eightfold Path as an authentic, useful, and effective Dhamma practice. What I'm referring to there is that the Buddha studied many different meditation practices. He mastered them very quickly and very quickly abandoned them as not leading to the goal, because they simply established in his mind further self-referential views and further distraction. Engaging in the noble search brings a possibility for all human beings to become rightly self-awakened through integrating the Noble Eightfold Path. And finally, now for the sutta. The Ariyapariyesana Sutta, Siddhartha's noble search for the noble path. On one occasion, the Buddha was in Savatthi at Jita's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. He adjusted his robe. In taking his alms bowl, he left it for town for his daily meal. A large group of monks approached Ananda. It has been a long while since we heard a Dhamma talk from the great teacher. It would be for our long-term benefit to hear a Dhamma talk from the awakened one. So again, just the setting. What is remarkable to me is that we are able to put ourselves back 2,600 years to what was occurring during the Buddha's time and in the Buddha's Sangha. And you'll see the Buddha's asked to give us a teaching. And he decided at this point it was appropriate to teach why he teaches what he teaches and how he discovered it. Ananda says, "Venerable ones, perhaps if you went to the hermitage of Ramaka, you will get to listen to a Dhamma talk from the Buddha." Ananda's starting to scheme a little bit here. "We will do as you say, Venerable Ananda." The Buddha returned from alms and asked Ananda to accompany him to the eastern park and the palace of Megara's mother for the day's abiding. Then, having spent the day in seclusion, the Buddha asked Ananda to accompany him to the eastern gatehouse to bathe. Having bathed, Ananda said to his teacher, "The hermitage of Ramaka is nearby. It is pleasant and delightful. There are many there awaiting your teaching. It would be of benefit to them if, out of sympathy, you were to go there." The Buddha agreed, and they left for Ramaka's hermitage. As they approached, they heard a Dhamma discussion underway. The Buddha waited for the discussion to end. Hearing silence, he cleared his throat and knocked to announce his arrival. Upon entering, he sat on a prepared seat and addressed the Sangha. "For what discussion were you all gathered here?" "Great teacher, we were discussing you, and then you arrived." "Good. It is fitting that you have gone forth from good families, from home to homelessness, and gather for Dhamma discussion. When you gather as a Sangha, you should always discuss the Dhamma or practice noble silence." And just as a commentary, and it relates to those talks on jhana, noble silence is practiced when gathered as a Sangha and is also an aspect of the stilling of self-talk developed in the second level of meditative absorption, the second level of jhana. So we all engage in that aspect of noble silence during our meditation practice when we're doing it as the Buddha teaches. Uh-oh. Mm-hmm. Give me 1 second to make sure this is still working. Sorry about that. Friends, there are two types of searching for understanding. There is ignoble searching and noble searching. And what is ignoble searching? Ignoble searching occurs when a person, subject to birth, seeks happiness in what is also subject to birth. My comment: the profound nature of this statement cannot be overlooked. All things that arise are prone to cessation. Seeking happiness by craving for or clinging to anything in the impermanent world is also clinging to or joining with stress, disappointment, and ongoing unsatisfactory experiences. You'll remember in the Anatalakkhana Sutta, where the Buddha teaches that whatever is impermanent cannot constitute a self. And so the Buddha is referring to that here, that anything that is and he's not just talking about physical birth, anything in the impermanent world, anything that is prone to arising and passing away, objects, events, views, and ideas, if we cling ourselves to them or create an identity by clinging ourselves to them, we are going to create distraction and stress in our lives. You remember the Buddha's description of suffering, of dukkha. Birth is suffering, sickness is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering. Not getting what is desired is suffering, receiving what is undesired is suffering. And then he would always close that by saying, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are suffering. Form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and consciousness, meaning thinking rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths, is all an aspect of suffering. Later on in this year, or maybe the beginning of next year, I hope to get to it before the end of the year, and it will be the next series of kind of in-depth talks, is going to be on, in a much deeper way than we've ever covered before, the 3 marks of existence, including the nature of dukkha and how all of those 3 marks relate to the 5 clinging aggregates. So the Buddha's describing here in this ignoble search, notice as the Buddha is describing what an ignoble search is how it's caught up or bound to 5 clinging aggregates and the other descriptions of suffering. The Buddha continues, ignoble searching occurs when a person subject to sickness seeks happiness in what is also subject to sickness. Ignoble searching occurs when a person subject to aging seeks happiness in what is also subject to aging. Ignoble searching occurs when a person subject to death seeks happiness in what is also subject to death. Ignoble searching occurs when a person subject to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, to delusion, seeks happiness in what is also subject to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, and delusion. All of that, what the Buddha is saying, is that we seek happiness through identifying or grasping after anything in the world, we are setting ourselves up for disappointment. He's not saying don't live in the world, don't partake of the things of the world, don't notice a beautiful sunset, don't forget to kiss babies. But he's simply saying do not create self-identity over them. Do not attach yourself, and do not create a condition where your happiness is dependent on anything that is impermanent. Because if it's impermanent, it can't be a self. I'm going to skip over commentary here. The Buddha continues, and what is it, the subject that is subject to birth? Spouses and children are subject to birth. So the Buddha is not saying we shouldn't have spouses and we shouldn't have children. He's simply saying we should not attach ourselves and put a condition on ourselves being happy based on spouses and children. Why? Because they are impermanent. To understand the true nature of it. And what does that allow us to be? It doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in committed relationships, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't have children. It simply means we should understand the true nature of relationships with our spouses and with our children, with our family. And it doesn't mean that we won't experience sorrow when impermanence intervenes and we lose a loved one. Remember when the Buddha heard his dad was dying, he didn't just sit there aloof and say, oh, well, everything's impermanent. He got up and walked 140 miles so he could be with his dad before he passed. He simply had let go of any self-identification or any need for his dad to be present for him to be at peace and at calm. Buddha continues. Men and women slaves are subject to birth. A lot of times when I edit the suttas, I change the language slightly just to modernize it. I left that in for a reason, because men and women slaves during the Buddha's time were possessions, weren't they? So it relates to anything that we possess and cling to as necessary for our own happiness. Animals of all types that are subject to birth. Gold and silver or material wealth are all subject to birth. There was a discussion, I can't remember where, about why the Buddha would use something that obviously isn't born and passes away in a physical sense, but it is in our experience, isn't it? We acquire these things. They are given birth in our lives. And so it's certainly relevant. that material possessions arise and pass away, don't they?
Isn't it the same thing, John? Just your discussion before. The idea of outrage, you attach yourself to it. How do you then go the next day and function with that situation?
Is that a question or is it a statement? Because it could be both.
I guess a question. Like I remember on a Saturday, not my Mary, but the other Mary, she asked the question, how do you function in this world?
Without that, when you're free of what you not to rephrase what you're saying, but you're saying what you're not to do it, but I'm going to do it. How do you function in the world when you don't need the world to be any different than it is? Where's your motivation out there? And your motivation comes from true and pure understanding of the nature of suffering. And the most powerful and loving thing we can do for ourselves and for everyone else, including those we might feel deserve only hate, is to understand the nature of suffering and what ignorance brings to people. And so, a good example could be the guy that shot up that house of worship. It's awful what he did, but I don't need to have hate for, I can't remember his name, I only heard it once. I don't need to have hate in myself to know that what he did was hateful. And it allows me the understanding of knowing where his hate came from, doesn't it? And so I don't even have to take up a stance in any particular way to be clear in my mind what's occurring in the world. And it's not just one guy shooting up a synagogue. It's the world is aflame because it's rooted in ignorance. And so how do you live in the world? You live in the world quite well and at peace, and you can respond in a much more mindful and meaningful way, can't you? It's not out of hate. It's not in opposition to anything, because that's simply foolish. I don't mean not in opposition to someone shooting up a synagogue or mailing pipe bombs or anything else that goes on. Of course, we don't approve of those things. But we accept them because it's what's occurring in the world. And from that radical acceptance, you can say the Buddha was the greatest example of radical acceptance. We are then able to take true and effective measures to changing the world, because we're not relying on legislation to change people's minds, because we're no longer relying on legislation to change our own mind, meaning creating our own values that are rooted in ignorance. We are engaging in the world from a place of profound wisdom, and that's how we function in the world tomorrow or after a horrible event like that. Ram.
It's also in both these cases, the current cases, it's abundantly clear that they both happen out of pure ignorance.
Yes, and the problem is we understand that very well here. I would bet that all of us do. But there's many people that if you made that statement, it would be excused away as just way too simplistic, because we want to see the complexity in all of this. But the truth of the matter is, just like our Dhamma practice is very direct and very simple, that is the root cause, isn't it? And if we would accept that, if we, and I'm not us here, if imagine if the leaders, and I'm not just talking about one guy again, the leaders, the true leaders, all the people in the houses of Congress, down to our local mayors, if they really understood that the problems that we're facing in the world are rooted in ignorance, what would they do? They would insist that everybody start learning knowledge of Four Noble Truths, wouldn't they? Because that's how we're going to bring an end to all this. And no other way. The Buddha taught this 2,600 years. The teachings are still here. But the world is still rooted in ignorance, isn't it? The world is still aflame. And it's not because the Dhamma doesn't work. We know that it does. It's that enough people aren't.
This small little group, but the leaders aren't going to do that.
Yes.
And now I have to come up with a balance to what I'm integrating into my life, and then you went out there.
Yes. And so I don't want to get too far off of this because I want to finish it, but this is an important discussion. So what we know, and again, it's hard to pull your view back in from an objectified worldview and say that what's most important, in light of what's occurring in the world, is for me to develop peace in my own mind first, for me to end conflict within me, and hopefully then I can address it without. Because we know that since the beginning of mankind, since we were trying to collect more coconuts in my tent than the next guy had, we've been trying to figure out how can we live peacefully on this planet, and we haven't figured it out yet, have we? With all the great minds and all the great legislation, all the great laws, all the great different types of government, we haven't figured it out yet. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we should ignore it, but it does mean that as individuals, maybe we should start looking at things a little differently.
And I guess,
Maybe we should go from a wrong view to a right view.
and for me, like, I know I'm developing that, but that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
So
What
am I ignoring out there?
What's beyond you, though, David, that you can actually have a real effect on? And I mean a lasting effect. It doesn't, and I'm not saying that if we feel like we should take a sign and go protest something, that's fine. Hopefully that the motivation to do something like that is rooted in wisdom. And it's not rooted in hate, and it's not rooted in, I know that my view is the most compassionate view, and because that person doesn't hold that view, they're evil, they're an animal, they're racist, or all the other epithets that we throw at people that we don't understand or don't think the way we think, because that's just hate, isn't it? So as an individual, if we're going to engage in anything in the world, we should do it from a place that's free of conflict. And then the decision to go out and maybe carry a sign or give a speech or do whatever else we might do, run for office, is rooted in wisdom. And it won't contribute to further hatred. And if we find ourselves in a group that is basically professing hate rooted in false compassion, we might find that it's wise to extricate ourselves from that group. I know I did that when I was 15 years old, engaged in a march against Vietnam. I don't want to even get into all that, but I realized that there was more hate in that group than there was anywhere else. It had a profound effect, and it probably still to this day. It's such an important question that you bring up, and that Mary brought up, and that we are all concerned. How do we live in the world? By awakened human beings, very peacefully and with great wisdom. How did the Buddha live in the same world that we live in today, 2,600 years ago? Very peacefully. And he was able to teach rulers, sometimes bloodthirsty rulers of his time, not how to end conflict, because he knew that wasn't possible at the time. He taught leaders how to act with love and compassion towards the people that they conquered. And you've all heard me tell the story of Ashoka. Ashoka was probably the most bloodthirsty ruler that this world has ever seen. And this is about 250, 300 years after the Buddha's passing. And he came across the Dhamma, studied it, awakened, and never harmed another soul. In fact, he did something back then that we're still trying to figure out today. He started universal health care 2,300 years ago. He went so far as he started universal veterinarian care. That's how big a heart he had, and his mind was so free and at peace. So it does not mean that as we awaken, we don't take responsibility for the world around us, but we understand the most significant responsibility we can take is to awaken. And in that way, the Buddha described himself prior to his awakening as an unawakened bodhisattva, which it's not denigrating that ideal of a bodhisattva. He's describing himself as a human being motivated by great compassion, but lacking the understanding of how to actually present it to the world. And so he really didn't do much in the world, at least as far as we know, and besides striving for awakening, as we're studying tonight, except strive for awakening. And then he went and he literally changed the world. Liz, did you have your hand up?
I did. There are people that don't have the mental capacity to understand. So I can say with compassion that the person that shot up the synagogue or sent out multiple bombs doesn't have the capacity. The mental capacity.
Yeah.
Because of their mental illness.
Mhm.
And I can say with compassion that these people are completely out of their minds. You know,
Yep.
and I can say that without drawing hate towards myself or towards them.
Me too. Yep.
So if the best thing we can all do, we're always going to have the situation where there are people that will never take to the Dhamma.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also people that do have the capacity to understand the Dhamma and still act
Will never
out
take.
of ignorance.
Yeah. So this is why the Buddha understood this, and it's such a fundamental. It's not really a question. You're at. It's a fundamental concern, isn't it? And it's something that the Buddha, that 2 weeks between his awakening and when he decided it was okay to start teaching was not okay. It would be fruitful to teach. Remember, he said, if there's only a few folks with just a speck of dust in their eyes, it's worth it. He never set himself up as a savior. He didn't say that his Dhamma was going to be salvific in any way, as opposed to other dharmas of his time, and even modern religions, don't they? They teach that. He simply taught a way to end conflict in our minds, and with the understanding that the more people that could do that, the less conflict there would be in the world. So, but you could say, when I heard about this guy, that was my first thought. It was, and you know, my thinking has changed. I don't often talk about myself, but years ago when I heard something like this, I would say, this guy deserves everything. We should cut him up in little pieces and burn him and do everything that we can. We should just torture the guy and make him suffer like he made other people suffer. And I'm over exaggerating how my mind would get, but that's how it would get. Now, when I hear something, my first thought is sadness for this waste of a human life, and a mind rooted in ignorance that would go so far. And of course, compassionate and empathetic sadness for all the lives that were lost, and that whole community. It's just awful. The Buddha described that as 2,600 years ago as dukkha occurs because of ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And again, some people will say, well, that's just too simplistic. We can't accept that. But that's the cause of it, isn't it? And so it allows us to have understanding of mindless people, like whatever his name is, and all the other insane people that we've had, the true mindless monsters that we've had in the world. We understand where it comes from. And so while it's not likely that this guy, if he ever came to our Sangha and wanted to learn the Dhamma and came week after week after week, he probably wouldn't get it. Probably wouldn't, but he might. The point that I'm getting, though, is if there was more people in the world, in our societal environment, that had ended all their wrong views, perhaps there wouldn't have been the influence that drives people this far. And again, it's just speculation. But again, where does it leave us? What's the most important thing we can do is to take to the Dhamma and awaken, and not be distracted by the dukkha that is present in the world and always will be. Suffering arises because of ignorance. It manifests through human beings, doesn't it? But that's, we live in a world populated by human beings. That's how it manifests. Locking people away, or, I don't want to get into the death penalty debate, but putting them to death hasn't worked either. All the devil's island things have never worked. There'll always be that. What can I do? I can end conflict in my mind and hopefully not contribute it to the world. And then think about us as a Sangha. We aren't doing anything to contribute to any suffering in the world around us, are we? That is, I hope it's not lost on you how important that is, how significant that is. Because there's a lot of people, a lot of well-intentioned people that are. And again, we've probably gotten a little too far with this. But
And look at the Buddha's reaction to Anila Mill.
exactly, it's another perfect example.
Because he had every right to be completely outraged. And he wasn't. He
What
showed
do
him
I-
basically the error of his ways.
Yeah, that's all.
And to Anila Miller's good fortune, he was smart enough, or he was intelligent enough to see
Yep.
what was given to him.
Yep. Anyway, and this was a guy that was rooted in murder, rooted in wrong views, and he heard the Dhamma. Where are you going? We're not done yet. Talk to you soon. We may finish half this talk tonight. It'll be online. Yeah, I'm sorry that we got. I'm not sorry. One of the reasons why I debated saying what I said earlier was to not get into this, but I think it's entirely appropriate that we do, and it certainly relates to what the Buddha taught and why, doesn't it?
And what's happening in the world.
And what's happening in the world. And not to make the blank statement. Well, how do we mean not? I'm gonna make it. All the philosophical developments, all the commitment to religions, all the governmental systems we've developed has not done anything really. And you can say that it's allowed people to live more in peace. In fact, that's kind of the an agnostic's acceptance of religion. At least it gives people some moral direction, but it really hasn't worked, has it? And again, the Buddha understood this. That's why he didn't teach something else. He taught a way for individuals to end conflict in their mind. And then with the possibility, and I think it's the only possibility, that we could maybe end some conflict in the world. But it all starts with us. I just went through what is subject to birth. Spouses and children are subject to birth. Men and women slaves are subject to birth. Animals of all types are subject to birth. Gold and silver or material wealth are all subject to birth. When these are seen as acquisitions, one becomes attached and infatuated with these acquisitions. Seeking happiness with what is subject to birth is an ignoble search. Likewise, these are all subject to sickness, to aging, to death, to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, to delusion. Seeking happiness with what is subject to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, to delusion is ignoble searching. And what is noble searching? Noble searching is, while being subject to birth, seeking to understand the suffering of birth, seeking the unborn, the unexcelled release of the yoke, the unbinding. This is noble searching. When the Buddha described awakened right view, he described that as a view that has a profound and penetrative understanding of suffering, of the nature of suffering. Noble searching is, while being subject to sickness, to aging, to death, to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, to delusion, seeking what is free of sickness, of aging, of death, free of sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, free of greed, aversion, and delusion. This is noble searching. So this is an incredibly profound statement, because the Buddha is saying that even though at the present moment your minds are rooted in ignorance, you begin the noble search right where you are. Does anyone want to get that? And then by recognizing and accepting who and what you are in this present moment, understanding the 5 clinging aggregates, then you can recognize that and simply abandon them. We begin right where we are. Noble searching is seeking the unexcelled release of the yoke, the unbinding. This is noble searching. This is how the Buddha described awakened right view. Understanding stress, understanding the origination of stress, understanding the cessation of stress, and understanding the path leading to the cessation of stress. That's the Buddhist description of a fully developing understanding of 4 noble truths. Friends, before my self-awakening, when I was still an unawakened bodhisattva, being subject to birth, to sickness, to aging, to death, to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, to delusion. I was seeking happiness in what is subject to birth, to sickness, to aging, to death, to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, and to delusion. He understood during his search at some point that it was an ignoble search. He was looking in the wrong place. My comment: this one statement clearly describes the distraction inherent in the common Mahayana Buddhist bodhisattva path that contradicts and displaces the Noble Eightfold Path. There's more on that on my article on Modern Buddhism, A Thicket of Views. The Buddha continues. Then the thought occurred to me, why do I, being subject myself to birth, to sickness, to aging, to death, to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, to delusion, seek what is likewise subject to those things? I won't go through the list again. What if I, being subject to birth, were to seek to understand the suffering of birth, seeking the unborn, the unexcelled, the release of the yoke, the unbinding from those wrong views? I just explain that. What if I, being subject to sickness, to aging, to death, to sorrow, regret, pain, distress, despair, to greed, to aversion, to delusion, were to seek understanding of the suffering of those things? What if I were to seek the unborn, the unexcelled release of the yoke, the unbinding? In other words, seeking understanding of these things rather than seeking a way to escape them or overcome them. Because you can't. They're part of life. My comment here, it's important. Siddhartha Gotama is describing his thought process prior to going forth into homelessness. He realized that he had to leave those things behind if he was going to develop an understanding of it. The Buddha continues, so at a later time, while still a young man, black-haired, early in my life, my parents crying, I shaved off my hair, put on a robe made of rags, and went forth from home to homelessness. And that was at the age of 26. Having gone forth, seeking understanding of these things, seeking what is skillful, seeking unexcelled and lasting peace, I went to Alara Kalama. On arrival, I said to him, friend Alara, I want to practice your Dhamma and discipline to become your disciple. Alara said to me, you may stay. My Dharma is such that an observant person can soon understand and integrate my knowledge and realize it for themselves through their own direct knowledge. The Buddha says, from reciting and repetition, I quickly learned his Dharma. I could affirm that I knew his Dharma. I thought that it is not through the mere conviction that Alara Kalama declares that I understand and have integrated his Dharma and realize it for myself through direct knowledge. Alara Kalama certainly understands and has integrated this Dharma. So the Buddha is saying that he learned it on an intellectual level and then he continued and deepened it. So I went to Alara and asked him, what is the culmination of your understanding and integration of this Dharma? Alara declared, the culmination of this Dharma is establishment in the dimension of nothingness. And that can be, this was Alara Kalama's specific take on understanding, was establishing yourself in the realm of nothingness. Another word might be establishing yourself in emptiness. But any non-physical, the Buddha is now understanding that any Dharma that seeks to establish a self in any non-physical realm is just another distraction. It's just another way of self-establishment and self-identification. Then I thought, not only does Alara Kalama have conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment, I also have conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. All important qualities. But if they're applied to the wrong teaching, they're only going to continue distraction. What if I were to strive to realize for myself this Dharma through direct knowledge? I quickly developed understanding and fully integrated Alara Kalama's Dharma, having realized it for myself, the dimension of nothingness through direct knowledge. I then asked Alara if this was the culmination of his understanding and integration of his Dharma. Alara told me this was the culmination of his understanding and integration of his Dharma. He then said that it was a great gain for his Sangha to have a companion such as myself in their Sangha. He then asked me to lead their Sangha together. Alara Kalama, my teacher, placed me on the same level as himself, paying me great honor. But I had the thought that this Dharma does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, or to unbinding. This Dharma only seeks to establish a reappearance in the dimension of nothingness. Again, he's just establishing a self in this imaginary realm. My comment. Siddhartha here is evaluating the value of reaching the culmination of Alara's Dharma. He is cautious about continuing an ignoble search due to a fabricated vested interest from previous effort and association and praise from Alara Kalama. Meaning he put some time and effort in developing this Dharma. It would be very easy to then fall back on that and say, well, okay, this is something. I'm getting praise for it. Let me accept this and let me go on teaching it. The Buddha continues, I found this Dharma unsatisfactory, and so I left Alara Kalama and continued the noble search. As I continued the noble search, I went to Uddaka Ramaputta. Upon arrival, I said, Friend Uddaka, I want to practice your Dharma and discipline to become your disciple. Uddaka replied, You may stay. My Dharma is such that an observant person can soon understand and integrate my knowledge and realize it for themselves through their own direct knowledge. From reciting and repetition, I quickly learned his Dharma. I could affirm that I knew his Dharma. I thought that it is not through the mere conviction that Uddaka Ramaputta declares that I understand and have integrated his Dharma and realized it for myself through direct knowledge. Uddaka Ramaputta certainly understands and has integrated his Dharma. So I went to Uddaka and asked him, what is the culmination of your understanding and integration of this Dharma? Uddaka declared that the culmination of his Dharma was establishment in the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, another non-physical establishment. Then I thought, not only does Uddaka Ramaputta have conviction, persistence, mindfulness, and discernment, I also have conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. What if I were to strive to realize for myself this Dharma through direct knowledge? I quickly developed understanding and fully integrated Uddaka Ramaputta's Dharma. Having realized for myself the dimension of nothingness through direct knowledge and the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. I then asked Uddaka if this was the culmination of his understanding and integration of his Dharma. Uddaka told me this was the culmination of his understanding and integration of his Dharma. He then said that it was a great gain for his Sangha to have a companion such as myself in their Sangha. He then asked me to lead their Sangha together. Uddaka Ramaputta, my teacher, placed me on the same level as himself, paying me great honor. But I had the thought that this Dharma does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, or to unbinding. This Dharma only seeks to establish a reappearance in the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. Siddhartha evaluated that just as we did before. I found this Dharma unsatisfactory, and so I left Uddaka Ramaputta and continued the noble search. I'm going to stop there. I think that's enough for tonight. So the Buddha has now studied with two of the most well-known, well-respected, advanced spiritual teachers of his time, mastered their dharmas very quickly and rejected them as not leading to his goal of understanding. And so the rest of the sutta, that's about halfway through. He describes other ways that he sought understanding and how he finally came to develop what he developed, and then how he taught his five friends. So that'll be next week. Thank you for listening to the first half of this and a great discussion so far. Any questions directly related to this sutta before we go around the room? Lorna, good to see you this evening. How are you?
Good to be here. Thank you for the teaching. I really don't have anything to add.
Glad you're here. Ron, good to see you.
Good to be here. Yeah, I think I'm going to wait for the second part.
Coming attractions.
Give
Yeah.
a comment on that. Yeah, I don't think I've ever read the whole sutta, but I will.
Yeah, it's important. And like I said, I think it's one of the most significant suttas, just because of the story, the true story of what the Buddha went through and why it's important to have why he taught a very well focused and constrained Dhamma.
Which Nikaya is this from?
Pardon me?
Which one of the Nikayas is this from?
I think Majjhima Nikaya.
Oh.
I think.
Then I-
Yeah. Well, it's on the website too.
Yeah.
Andrew, good to see you.
Good evening. I have nothing enlightened.
I'm glad you're here.
Excuse me very much. But
Say hello to Judy, please.
Good night.
Kevin, good to see you.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, we missed you.
I think I'll spend some more time reading this sutta. And maybe next week I'll see.
Wow. Thank you. Left you all speechless. Hello, Helen.
I too am speechless.
Good to see you. David, do you have anything to say?
I've said enough.
I'm glad you're here. Bonnie, good to see you tonight.
I got a lot of dusting now. What to do?
I'm glad you're here. Liz, good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to be here. I came tonight thinking that I would ask you if you were going to go through the basics of the Eightfold Path over the winter again, because I think I need to go back to the basics.
You mean the Truth of Happiness course?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we will probably
Good.
start in January.
Okay. I'll look forward to it.
Glad you're here. Brett, good to see you.
It's good to be here. Thanks for your teaching. Yeah, I'm here for the basics. I need to get back to the basics too. But it's good to hear when you're talking about just that any act that's rooted in ignorance just adds to more ignorance. We were talking about that at the beginning, and I'm realizing this. Just simple things like the Four Noble Truths and the right speech and stuff like that, and how I handle resentment or other people who in my life and stuff like that. So good to just be able to get the thing, hear these things and then be able to helps me stop myself in the process of losing it.
Yeah.
Or continuing to add to my state of of ignorance or perpetuate the whole ongoing different.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. We learn how to practice restraint. I mean, that is ultimately one of the key aspects of the Buddhist teaching, including as it relates to this sutta, practicing restraint on wanting to adapt or accommodate or embellish what he taught. It's enough. Our Dana dinner is coming up November 20th, Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. We have someone who's bringing tables and someone who's bringing the paper plates and cups and knives and forks, etc. We still could use someone to get maybe 4 or 5 liters of soft drinks, some water, and some ice, and I think we got it covered. So, and there's a basket out there for donations that I'll be giving to Julie to help offset their costs for putting this thing on. And also, if you get any free turkeys from ShopRite or any place else, turkeys or ham or anything like that,
When would they need them by?
I gotta get a hold of Julie, and I'm not sure if they have storage space like right now, but I'll find out. But yeah, if you have, because we've invited the town government and the first responders, if they all come, I don't think they will, but there's going to be a few hundred people there. But there's going to be, I would expect a lot, more than usual. So
At one point you mentioned tables and chairs.
Jen's bringing tables. She's bringing 3 folding tables, so that should be enough. I don't think, chairs, I don't know, we need more chairs. If it looks like we can always come here. There's 30 folding chairs here. But yeah, I think it's just soft drinks and ice that we need now. Yeah, and any donations again that offset the cost to Julie, and any turkeys and hams that you might not be taking.
John will bring a bunch of club soda bottles, big club soda bottles. Would that be?
That's great. Yeah.
Bring water.
Great. Okay. Beautiful. I think that's it. We'll finish as we always do with Karaniya Metta Sutta. So again, find your relaxed meditation posture and take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight. Peace.